of the most shocking turning points in Dutton Ranch Episode 7 is the revelation that everything surrounding Beulah Jackson's present struggles is rooted in one defining moment from her past. The episode slowly peels back layers of her history, revealing that the life she built, the choices she made, and even the conflicts tearing her family apart all trace back to a single traumatic night in 1981. Through carefully constructed flashbacks, we see a version of Beulah that feels almost unrecognizable compared to the hardened woman in the present timeline. She is younger, freer, and full of optimism about life. At that time, she is not yet shaped by fear or burdened by responsibility. Instead, she is simply a young woman trying to enjoy a night out with friends at Billy Bob's Texas in Fort Worth. But that night would become the turning point that changed everything. Beulah is accompanied by Mariano Reyes, her father's most trusted ranch hand, who has been assigned to keep an eye on her. Mariano is not just a worker on the ranch. He is deeply loyal to the Jackson family, and his presence that night is meant to ensure nothing goes wrong. At first, everything seems harmless. Music, dancing, laughter. There is no sign of danger. But that illusion quickly breaks when a mechanic named Luke enters the picture. He approaches Beulah casually, asking her to dance, blending into the crowd in a way that makes him appear harmless and familiar. However, the episode subtly reveals that Luke is calculating. He is not there by coincidence. He studies the situation carefully and begins to manipulate the environment around Beulah. The key moment comes when he distracts Mariano through the bartender. It is a small but critical diversion, one that pulls the ranch hand's attention away just long enough for Luke to isolate Beulah from the group. By the time Mariano realizes something is off, it is already too late. Beulah has disappeared into the night. What follows is not shown in explicit detail, and the episode makes a clear creative decision to avoid focusing on the assault itself. Instead, it shifts the narrative toward its emotional impact, the confusion, the fear, and the irreversible psychological damage that follows. When Mariano eventually finds Beulah, she is alive but emotionally shattered. The woman who left the dance floor earlier is gone. In her place is someone deeply traumatized, unable to process what has just happened. One of the most important aspects of this scene is Beulah's reaction afterward. She does not immediately turn to her father. She does not report what happened. Instead, she makes a decision that defines the rest of her life: silence. Too afraid, too ashamed, and too emotionally overwhelmed, she asks Mariano to lie. She instructs him to tell her father that she simply fell from a mechanical bull. It is a cover story designed to protect her reputation, but in reality, it begins a long cycle of suppression and emotional isolation. From that moment forward, Beulah is no longer the same person. The episode carefully emphasizes that trauma does not always appear immediately as destruction. Sometimes it becomes identity. Beulah's transformation is gradual but permanent. Fear becomes part of how she moves through the world. Control becomes her obsession. And protection, especially of her family, becomes her mission. One of the most subtle yet powerful symbols introduced in the flashback is the missing boot. When Mariano finds Beulah, she is disoriented and mentions that she has lost one of her boots. At first, it appears insignificant, almost like a random detail in a chaotic situation. But the episode later reframes it entirely. The missing boot becomes a symbol of something stolen from her, not just physically, but emotionally. It represents dignity, safety, and control. It is a reminder that something fundamental was taken that night, and it was never truly recovered. This symbolism becomes even more important when we learn that, weeks later, Beulah discovers she is pregnant. The timing of this revelation adds another layer of complexity. At the same time she is dealing with the aftermath of trauma, her family is preparing for a major public moment. Her father is expected to deliver a speech that could potentially position Beulah as the future heir of the Jackson Empire. Instead of stepping into a moment of empowerment, she is forced into silence and survival. Although the series never confirms it outright, Episode 7 strongly implies that Rob Will may be Luke's biological son. This theory recontextualizes their entire relationship throughout the series. It could explain why Beulah always maintains emotional distance from him, even though he is one of her children. It also introduces a painful contradiction. Her son may be a permanent reminder of the worst night of her life. The question of how Beulah explains the pregnancy to her father becomes one of the most important unanswered mysteries in the episode. A strong theory suggests that Mariano takes responsibility for the situation. Given that he was assigned as her protector, it would be easy for Beulah's father to blame him for what happened. This single decision could explain Mariano's disappearance later in the timeline. It also explains why Beulah develops such a complicated emotional relationship with guilt, loyalty, and sacrifice. It may also be the reason Joaquin becomes so deeply integrated into the Jackson family. Raised under Beulah's protection, he effectively becomes part of the family structure in a way that fills the emotional gap left by these hidden events. The second flashback delivers the most intense moment of the episode. After discovering she is pregnant, Beulah makes a decision that changes everything again. She asks Mariano to drive her to Luke's home. At first, the intention is unclear. It could be closure, it could be confrontation. But what happens next reveals something far more decisive. Beulah enters the house armed with a gun. There is no hesitation, no emotional breakdown. She acts with a calmness that suggests she has already made peace with what she is about to do. In a single moment, she kills Luke. The aftermath of the scene is just as important as the act itself. As she leaves the house, Beulah turns to Mariano and says she has found her missing boot. This line redefines everything. The boot is no longer a literal object. It is a symbol of everything she believes was taken from her that night. By killing Luke, she believes she has restored balance. She has reclaimed control. She has taken back what was stolen. But justice in this world is never clean. The presence of Mariano in this moment raises even deeper questions. His loyalty to Beulah is absolute, but so is his guilt. It is strongly implied that he may have taken responsibility for Luke's death, shielding Beulah from legal consequences. If true, this act of sacrifice would explain his disappearance and possible transformation into a fugitive. It would also explain why Joaquin's place in the family becomes so complicated, built on secrecy, protection, and unresolved consequences. In the present timeline, Beulah's attention shifts to the future of Petal Ranch. After years of loyalty and sacrifice, Joaquin appears to be her chosen successor. He has dedicated his entire life to the ranch, staying loyal even when others left or betrayed the family. However, Rob Will's sudden return changes everything. Escaping rehab and returning to the ranch, Rob Will immediately asserts dominance over the situation. Unlike Joaquin, who represents loyalty and service, Rob Will represents entitlement and inheritance. He believes the ranch belongs to him by blood alone. The tension escalates quickly when Rob Will threatens Joaquin directly, making it clear that he will not accept him as heir under any circumstances. This forces Beulah into an impossible position. If she chooses Joaquin, she risks Rob Will destroying everything. If she chooses Rob Will, she betrays the man who has been most loyal to her family. Ultimately, she chooses Rob Will, but the decision is not based on preference. It is based on survival. She is trying to prevent internal war, not reward one son over another. From Joaquin's perspective, however, the decision feels like betrayal. After years of loyalty, sacrifice, and emotional investment, he is discarded in a single moment. His departure from the ranch is quiet but emotionally devastating. However, this is unlikely to be the end of his story. The narrative strongly suggests that Joaquin may eventually seek out Mariano, which could reintroduce buried secrets and reignite old conflicts tied to Luke's death and the original cover-up. Meanwhile, Carter and Oriana's storyline adds another emotional collapse within the ranch. Carter's confession of love is met with rejection as Oriana becomes increasingly close to Harrison Williams, a wealthy and socially influential figure from her past. When she publicly downplays Carter's importance and hints at a deeper relationship with Harrison, Carter is emotionally shattered. Unable to cope, he turns to alcohol, which leads to one of the episode's most symbolic acts of destruction. In a moment of pain and confusion, Carter removes a taxidermied longhorn head from Beulah's office and destroys it. This act mirrors the broken horn earlier in the episode, reinforcing the idea that the ranch's legacy is fracturing from within. The longhorn is not just decoration. It is history, identity, and power. When it breaks, something deeper breaks with it. Beulah's collapse immediately after this moment is not coincidental. She has already been pushed to her emotional limit by Rob Will's return, Joaquin's departure, and decades of unresolved trauma. The destruction of the heirloom becomes the final trigger. Her body gives out under the pressure. The hospitalization that follows creates a power vacuum within the ranch. With Beulah incapacitated, Rob Will gains control of Petal Ranch almost instantly. This shift changes the entire power structure and creates immediate tension among those who distrust him. Figures like Rip Wheeler and Beth are openly skeptical of Rob Will's intentions. Others, like Zane Nash, question the legitimacy of his leadership. Meanwhile, Austin Lewis begins uncovering disturbing truths about disappearances and hidden operations within the ranch. His curiosity places him in direct danger, especially if Rob Will discovers what he knows. At this point, the story shifts from family drama into something far more dangerous: control, secrecy, and survival. Beulah's greatest fear slowly becomes reality. The threat is no longer external enemies or rival ranches. It is her own son. This sets up a devastating possibility for the future. Beulah may eventually be forced to make the same kind of irreversible decision she once made with Luke, but this time, the target would be Rob Will. Such a decision would not only destroy her emotionally, but also fracture the family beyond repair. Oriana, already emotionally unstable, would likely blame her permanently, creating another generation of resentment and pain. In the end, Episode 7 is not just about succession or inheritance. It is about how trauma echoes across time. It is about how a single night in 1981 continues to shape every major decision in Beulah Jackson's life. The past did not stay buried. It evolved. And now, it is consuming everything she built. The future of 10 Petal Ranch no longer feels stable. It feels fragile, divided, and on the verge of collapse.